go ahead as planned. Jamie will make the first presentation. I will make the second. Lou will be doing the third one, and the Law will be the fourth one. Stuart will be the last. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay,
right.
Jamie, your turn.
Yes. Let me. Okay, did I?
There is a little green button called the share screen.
Yeah, but my computer is behaving a little funny.
You have
okay.
If you have more than one screen.
Sorry, no. Host disable participant screen sharing.
Oh, well, sorry, that's my fault.
Yeah.
I need to click one more button. Yeah, now you can do that.
All right, in a minute. Okay.
If you have more than one screen, it will ask you to choose which one you want to share.
I have many screens, but
it will be labeled a 1, 2, 3.
I will get there eventually. I practiced yesterday. Okay, here it is.
Yes, we see it.
So, this I will be talking about Popper's three-world hypothesis, and since we're all familiar with it, I don't think it's necessary to introduce it. What I will tell you is how I got to know it. I didn't just read it, but I looked at Popper's bucket, and I thought, okay, so Popper is doodling and drawing and doing things with his pen while he's writing. So if Popper can doodle, I can do that also. And so when I was reading all his text about the three worlds, I immediately started like drawing circles and arrows and boxes and experimenting and trying to see, so what is he trying to tell us here, Popper? And so world 1, world 2, world 3, so what does it mean? Okay, world 1, the world as described in physics and chemistry. World 2, everything related to the mind. And now world 3, what he calls objective knowledge. There, I tried to make it concrete, and I had a little bit of trouble, but at some moments I say it's like maybe object-like knowledge or object knowledge. And then I concluded it's the set of all the human artifacts. So I kind of focused on the fact that Popper said very clearly it's man-made. We're talking about a man-made or a human-made world. So then the two top arrows, the one up and down, I saw up as the designing of the artifacts and the down as the using of the artifacts. Then since Popper is talking about texts, I say, okay, so this stands also for writing. Writing is a form of designing or creating, and using is reading. So it was like natural. It didn't take long. I was sitting somewhere in a seminar probably, that I say, let's split world 2 in world 2A and world 2B. And now I see clearly this, all the discursive activities. Dus there is here the double arrow is like writing. While I'm writing, my mind actually changes, and I can look at the things that I wrote. So there is a feedback there. Then I have in mind a reader. Dus the text won't change, but the reader will change after he reads my text. And then there are the discursive processes of talking, speaking, arguing. While I'm arguing, someone else hears me, but things may change inside me. And then there's also listening. And then the two bottom arrows are aging. And so then, this aging, there's a footnote. So I was thinking, so how do I call that in a good way that's very concrete? And I thought, well, maybe aging, because that's what it's all about. We get older and then we die, and we want to avoid dying. So then, I thought let's make it a little more concrete. So I added the body and arms and legs. So it was very clear. This is the human world. And once I did that, I said, why not go all the way and dus we use some cartoons, use some drawings to make it very clear what it is we're talking about. So the material world, dus the world 2 is the authors, the readers, and then everyone else that's not pictured here. And then world 3 is a set of all the artifacts. And in this case, I kind of focused just on text, knowledge artifacts. And to make it more specific, like management text, and a more specific strategic management text. And so we can get very specific. But the bottom line is that I saw for myself doodling with the pen and paper. I saw this 4 containers and 6 interactions between these containers. And then when I self-reflexively or reflexively apply Karl Popper, and what he's actually saying is, hey, you have an artifact in front of you. It's a book. I wrote this book. It's to communicate with you. And I'm actually telling something to you about a way of relating to the world. And so I clearly saw this a quadrangle and this a relation that we all have with the world, is that we communicate with one another via text across time and space. And now we do a whole bunch of other things. But the bottom line was that I kind of recognized, of course, Popper is totally on the mark. We have a world 3, all the artifacts, they stimulate our thinking. And so I don't know how many million years ago, the first group of humans got this idea of creating artifacts and manipulating them and doing things with them. And fast forward, we're here today. However, Popper said something else also, and that is don't. And the don't, he didn't really say that, but he kind of implicitly said it. He said world 3 never interacts directly with world 1. So, of course, then the first thing I'm going to do is say, so world 3 never interacts with world 1. Let's see what happens when they interact. So then I got the triangle. That is the same triangle that I noticed in Stuart's presentation. The world 2, the observer, world 3, the world of the artifacts, the text, and then world 1, the material world. So this Popper says we're never supposed to directly interact. World 3 never directly interacts with world 1. World 3 always interacts through world 2 with world 1. But since I was on a roll and I had done this before, I say, okay, let's put the real person there and let's give names to those interactions. And then I got my inspiration from my classes in physics, where they said, physics, you study a closed system. And so what does the scientist do? He observes, he describes, and then, just in the case of management, we develop hypotheses, and now we go and test whether these hypotheses are true or false. And like I did in the previous slide, I realized this is not just some schema that Popper is giving me, but it's actually a mental image. There's a way of imagining, of looking at the world. And then once I had just drawn this out, written this out, I noticed in the philosophy literature a discussion between Hilary Putnam and Richard Rorty, where they were talking about the God's eye view of the world and whether that was a good thing or not. And so I say, hey, maybe that is a God's eye view. But either way, I didn't want to just follow Popper's orders. I say, I'm going to do it. So what happens with when world 3 directly interacts with world 1? Now, would any of you care to name that interaction on the spot?
That's it.
Okay, well, no, I'm
It's
just
called,
asking. And actually, the question was for Stewart, because Stewart named the interaction. He called it like knowledge as a picture of reality. And so that is what is happening in this frame of thinking, is that we think of our knowledge as if our texts are pictures of reality, as if they're photographs of reality. So what Popper did, he basically zoomed in my attention on the fact that, hey, I'm using a metaphor when I'm working with text. Because obviously, if I take a text and I hold it next to whatever, there is no correspondence relation. There's just scribbles, dots, smudges. I mean, you can call it whatever you can call it, but it's definitely not a picture. Now, I do know there are certain languages where they use picture like symbols, but like if we ignore that for a moment, in the West, there is so obviously there's something happening in our mind that we decide there is a relation, and the relation is the one of a photograph or a picture. So once I became aware of that, then the question became, so how are we going to name this relation? So here we have the direct comparison, like a photograph, you hold it next to the original, like facial recognition software. You say, is this person is this a person that's on the most wanted list or not? And then we compare this the picture with the real person. So here, obviously, this is not happening. So again, anyone cares to name what sort of metaphor we're using here for a text in the next in the quadrangle? So Jason, that was for you, because you use the word here. Actually, we think of a text as a pair of glasses or a lens, and I'm picking this up from pragmatism. John Dewey talked about that specifically. So this what we have here then is basically an awareness that I got after reading Popper, that I realized, no, I was told in school that there was the Big Bang, and then there were atoms and they were colliding, and there were all these very complicated things happening, and then I came into existence. But what I realized after reading Popper is, no, the way this all happened is I learned about everything through reading. As a little child, I read a lot. I went to school. They taught me how to read. I read more and more. And while I was reading, I was using metaphors. And so, okay. And so I already discussed two of them, text as photographs, text as lenses. If you go in the literature, you will find sorry, did I do something? In the Enlightenment, they were comparing a text with a mirror. So there is just not those two. And then there are also a lot of metaphors that are being used. What I was using all along was the container metaphor. That is a metaphor at the basis of categorical logic. Popper used a bucket to say that he didn't believe in the idea that science starts with observation, but then he used the bucket in a different configuration to make an argument for the three world hypothesis. And then there is more to it. If you read Popper, there is this whole discussion, and not just Popper, is the whole philosophy of science. It's like, how do all the different sciences relate to one another? Is there like a top science, a bottom science? Is there like a fundamental science? So here the sciences are kind of ranked, or I use here just the example of the apartment building. I guess that's the model today. Like every science has its own floor in an apartment building. And so each floor makes its own rules about what is true and scientific, and then occasionally the different floors work together, but you don't have the right to go and interfere what's happening on another floor, so to say. So there is autonomy on each floor. But then if we think of it purely in terms of those containers, then we see there is also another option, and that is the circle. And Popper talks about that like indirectly when he calls it pluralism. However, when one goes and looks in the literature, and if one goes and studies like indigenous systems, the circle is a widely practiced symbol or practice. Dus that people come together, and instead of saying I'm in charge, I'm on top, or I'm totally unqualified, I'm at the bottom, it's like every point in the circle contributes something. Every point in the circle has a responsibility to speak up when the circle is is threatening, when there is tension in the circle. So everyone is equal, but everyone is also unique, and everyone is equally powerful. So if we then kind of go to the punchline from what I learned, this first is I learned about metaphors. I wasn't looking for it. Actually, it took me 5 years before I really went and looked up what is being said about metaphors. And then second is the question of gestalt shifting, because each metaphor kind of involves a little bit of now, I haven't found the perfect paper yet where they kind of say how gestalt shifting and metaphors work together. But the bottom line in a gestalt shifting approach is that the picture you're looking at, the dots, the pixels, it's identical. Yet something shifts in my mind that I see either the ducket, the duck, or the rabbit. And as you probably all know, this comes from Wittgenstein's logical investigation. And so what I got on from Popper was that he was talking that there are these two gestalts in human beings, so to say. This one is the hierarchical gestalt, where we clearly assume that there is this fixed order in society, and we think in that way, that we kind of assume we're somewhere in this order. And then we can also think in terms of a circle. And so that an important component to understand what is going on in the world, that is what I kind of concluded from studying Popper, is that we have these unobservables, and one of those unobservables is what we call consciousness. And that consciousness kind of needs its own container where it's being studied. And just what is happening at the moment is the computational theory of the mind is kind of the dominant paradigm. And practically everything, I mean, the mainstream is all computational theory of the mind. But that is just one metaphor. And so that what I got from Popper is to kind of a reminder that to say, hey, there are other ways of thinking about our consciousness, and we need to be open to that, because we may learn things there that we don't see in the computational theory of the mind. And now I get to my closing slide. So what you could see in that earlier picture was there's a human being that is like in a network of relationships, and one also could call it a process oriented conception of being human. Just that there is continuously all these feedback processes, but instead of just saying it in the abstract, Popper helped me see that there are all these discursive relations that are happening, and then there are also some physico-chemical relations, but that the way we're doing research at the moment is like the focus is all on those physico-chemical relations, and that perhaps we need to pay much more attention to these other relations. And then why again? Well, because for us to do science, we need to communicate. And it doesn't matter how great and awesome and brilliant our ideas are. If we can't communicate them properly, then no one will know. So then the simple answer is to say, but it's self-evident when there is a new idea. But the whole point of Thomas's Kuhn book was, no, it's not self-evident. There's all sorts of other stuff going on. And so it really might be helpful to pay attention to this whole issue of discursive processes. That's my conclusion.
Great.